Studies show that feeling lonely on an ongoing basis is worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So yeah, it
Oh my
absolutely.
gosh. That is crazy. Literally.
Hi, I'm Michael Hyatt,
And I'm Megan Hyatt Miller.
and you're listening to The Double Win Show. So today we're talking with Shasta Nelson, who's a relationship expert with a special focus on friendships. And I heard her a few months ago at a conference I was attending in Nashville and was blown away. So she has several books: The Business of Friendship, Making the Most of the Relationships Where We Spend Most of Our Time, Friendimacy, How to Deepen Friendships for Lifelong Health and Happiness, and Friendships Don't Just Happen. She's been featured on major platforms such as The Today Show, CNN, and The New York Times. Regularly speaks at conference. She has a TED Talk, which I suggest you start there, but founder of Girlfriend Circles, a community dedicated to fostering female friendships. And I really like what she says about loneliness, and friendship's the antidote to that. And we're going to dive deep into that in this conversation.
And by the way, this is not just for women.
That's right.
This might actually be more for men than women.
Well, I got a ton of value out of it.
Yeah.
So without further ado, here's our conversation with Shasta. Shasta, welcome to the show.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
You know, I heard you speak a couple of months ago at a Dan Sullivan event, CoachCon, in Nashville. And I'm just going to be honest, like I kind of went into your workshop because I couldn't get into the workshop I wanted to, but there was a reason for that. Because I didn't know what I didn't know, and I was blown away by your talk.
It's true. It's,
So thank you.
It's actually what you came back talking about.
Yeah, it was the single biggest takeaway from the whole conference.
Wow. Well, I'm so grateful to have been there and so grateful to be on today. I give high props to any podcaster, any author, any leader, speaker who is elevating the conversation of our relationships and our friendships. It is just singly one of the most significant issues of our time. And yet it's amazing how we still kind of treat it like not that important, kind of like, so kudos to you. I'm glad to be here.
I would love to start with your story. I want to get into the loneliness thing because that's a profound conversation that we want to have. But how did you get to that? Just kind of give us a little bit of your journey and how you ended up focusing on friendships.
Yeah, I get to be a friendship expert.
It's a good question. And it's much easier to answer in hindsight. But I was actually a trained pastor. So I pastored a church, and I can look back now and actually realize the reason I did that was because when I looked around at in college, that was where community was happening in my world at the time. Yeah. That was where you could impact people and do stuff together and change the world and support each other and all those things. And I did love so much of pastoring. And I also just started feeling like, wow, it's getting to the place where people have to, A, not that many people are going to church anymore to get that need met. And B, a lot of churches are getting into a situation where you have to believe what I believe in order to belong. Or, there's just so many other dynamics, and a lot of people actually don't feel like they belong and that that's a safe place for belonging. So it was really in that space that I found myself asking the big questions though, like what does it mean to belong? And do we all have to agree on the same thing to belong? And if we want people to belong, what are the things that we should be measuring for that? And what are the expectations we have of somebody who just walks into church the first time? Should they instantly belong? What's their responsibility? What's our responsibility? So it was really, for me, a social experiment, like a laboratory, if you will, for me to be like, how do you bond people? How do you run small groups? How do you train people? And of course, I did a lot of relationship counseling. And so that was really, in hindsight, one of the best laboratories for really looking at why people want to connect and how to do that. I ended up leaving that role and started what was back then the very first friendship matching site. So that was kind of I've always been 5 or 10 years ahead of the curve, which hasn't always worked out well for me. But yeah, I was just I believe there's more loneliness out there than we're naming. And I was coaching people, and I was hearing the need over and over of, both of you have this experience in masterminds, and when you're coaching, they're coming to you for one reason, but then you start asking them, who's supporting you, or who are your friends, or what are you hearing from the people around you? And I just kind of kept hearing well, I don't really talk about this with other people, or well, I don't really, I've moved away and haven't really built those friendships here. And you just keep hearing wow, people aren't feeling supported. They're not confiding in people. So that really put me in a place where I've been ever since then. So I've been in this for 15 years in this loneliness friendship space. Before it was an industry, before it was a big public conversation, I've been out there kind of feeling at times the person in the desert being like, hear ye, this matters, But yeah, it's been so rewarding in the last number of years to just have the research catch up, to have the science get clearer and clearer, and just to start having more and more voices, because this really is, I'm a little biased, but the science will back me up. This really is the biggest issue to our health, to our happiness, to our longevity. It's big.
I believe it.
Okay, you got to tell us a little bit, though. Like, not everybody knows that science. Not everybody. Yeah. Well, there are people who are listening that are going, wait, what? You mean it's not about like diet and exercise and sleeping more, all of which are important. But why? Why is community and relationship such a contributor to health and longevity?
There's so many fabulous reports right now. It's so fun. I could give a whole 1 hour keynote, and I do, to healthcare situations and training doctors and stuff on what the science is showing right now. But really, how you answer the question, how loved and supported do I feel in my life right now, tells us more about your health 10 years out than any other question you can answer. It has more to do with whether you're smoking, whether you're exercising, what you're eating. It's just like even things that we think are like, well, sleep is more important than relationships. Yes, but you sleep better when you feel connected, and your sleep is worse when you're lonely. So it's amazing that, and even when we think about like our nourishment, we absorb nutrients better when we feel connected. So basically when we feel lonely, when we feel disconnected, we're basically putting our body in kind of this stress mode that for a lot of us feels normal. Like we don't actually go like, I'm not that stressed, but we don't feel supported. And when we don't feel supported, our body is working so much harder to put ourselves in protection mode. And so that does an incredible amount of damage on our bodies. And so when we look at like the Harvard study just came out where it's the longest study that's ever been done. 85 years they've been tracking the biggest health components, and it comes down to their friendships. Like that was not what they went in thinking it was going to be. It comes down to friendships. Yeah. There's the studies that show, if you have healthy lifestyle habits defined by your diet and exercise and not smoking, or you have unhealthy habits by the opposite of all of those. And then if you feel supported and connected versus you feel lonely, it won't surprise any of us that the longest living, best performing group are those that have healthy lifestyle habits and feel connected. But what will surprise a lot of us is the second longest living, healthiest group are those who had unhealthy lifestyle habits and felt connected. Wow. It ends up doing more for our health than doing all the quote right things and being lonely. It's just so significant.
That's so interesting.
I believe it.
And it's like, we used to say, for a long time, people have said that sitting is the new smoking. It's like loneliness is the new smoking.
In fact, the studies show that feeling lonely on an ongoing basis is worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So yeah, it absolutely.
Oh my gosh. That is crazy. Literally.
So tell us a little bit about those statistics about loneliness, because I think a lot of people are moving at the speed that they don't even think they're lonely. It's only in those moments of reflection where they go, wait a second, I don't even know anybody to talk to about this. But what are the statistics? What do we know today? And how has that changed since 2020, for example?
Yeah, such good questions. So what's interesting is when we think of the word lonely, we often think of this like recluse or this hermit or this person who has no friends or no social skills. And so a lot of us, when we're lonely, we don't actually name it, which is a really big part of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the ability to do two things. It's accurately identify what you're feeling and then be able to move yourself back to a place of peace. And if we don't name the right feeling in the first place, it's really hard to do the second part and move ourselves back to getting our needs met and back to a place of safety. And so that loneliness is really important for us to actually look at and name. And it looks like some of us who don't have anyone to confide in, or we don't really feel like anyone gets us, or we don't feel like we have like the people who could like be our emergency calls, or the people who we feel like just do life with us. Like these are all the languages that we kind of hear these terms. It's not just having a social life. So what's really fascinating is the profile of a lonely person today is often somebody who's really busy, who is taking care of a ton of people, who is really good at loving people even, and can be in a care service position. Like they can be the ones who are managing people in healthcare. They can be taking care of everyone else. They can be taking care of their kids and their family. Like they can be the person who's taking care of everyone else. And they're usually amazing people skills. And they're usually trying to do so much for so many people. I mean, they're often spread thin. And at the end of the day, if they, when we ask the question, how loved and supported do you feel? Like, who's there for you? How connected and supported do you feel? And how you answer that question is a big part of like your loneliness. So I'll just end with this, but loneliness is just your body sending you a message that you have a need, that you're hungry for something. The same way I attribute it to like when you feel hungry for food or when you feel thirsty for a drink. It is not a judgment. Nobody's being like, how dare you get hungry? That's just so embarrassing. Don't tell anybody. Nobody's being like, oh, you drank yesterday. Why do you need to drink water again today? Like, this isn't something that we need to feel shame about. Your body, when it's tired, it yawns. Your body, when it's hungry, it needs food. When you're lonely, it's because your body is saying, I need to feel more connected in some way. And it's when we avoid that, when we dismiss it, when we ignore it, when we feel shame, then we're like less likely to get the need met and more likely to then, have our health suffer, our happiness drop and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, naming it is so important.
So how do we get here? I mean, I feel like this didn't used to be hard and now it feels hard.
Well, just to add color to that, I had a client call me, it's probably a month ago now. It's after I had met you. But she said to me, and this is the CEO of a very large company. And she said, I am so lonely and I don't have any friends, but I don't even know where to start. Mm-hmm. And so I said, why don't you start a book club around one of Shasta's books?
Good idea. Good idea.
But yeah, so I think this didn't used to be so hard, and now we've got people that just quite don't know how the world's changed.
It has.
And how do I make friends that are outside of work, especially? Yeah. And I know you've got a whole book on friendship at work.
And just to give some personal commentary in my own experience, I remember when I was single, I had this great group of friends. I got married a little later. Well, a little later if you live in Tennessee. I was 28. I was like practically, geriatric. And, I had this great group of friends and we would hang out on there was one married couple and everybody else was single. We'd hang out on the married couple's back porch. We'd, have some cocktails, play some music. Like it was so easy. And we all just came over. We stayed up really late. Well, then little by little, everybody got married. Mm-hmm. And as people got married, no one's hanging out on the back of someone's porch till 1 a.m. when you've got, a 5-year-old or a baby or, you got to get the kids out of the door for school. And so I think like a lot of people can identify with that there was a time in your life, maybe it was college, maybe it was before you were married, maybe it was when you worked at a certain place that, you worked a lot of hours where it was just easy to connect with people because you were together naturally. And then life changes. And so how much of it is that? How much of it is post 2020? I feel like everything's weird after COVID. So
yeah, that's so many questions, but let me see where to start.
I know.
I love it. I could talk about this all day. So
how did we get here? That's the real question.
Yeah. So for sure, we see loneliness on the rise and there's several factors contributing to it. We used to be much more social. We used to be leisure activities used to mean being outside. And in the last couple of decades, leisure activities with the invention of the TV and with different screens, we are like moving inside and we're doing things more solitarily. So we saw a decrease in the bowling leagues. We saw a decrease in neighborhood potlucks. We saw a decrease in church attendance. And so we see like those things all coming down of places where we used to interact and have those relationships a little bit more. But there's also a lot of factors around, a lot of us struggle with mental health a lot more. And so we have more social anxiety, more depression. It takes energy to go out and meet people. At the end of the day, what I can say is that we'll never, ever feel close to somebody without consistency locked in. So we can get into this in a little bit, but there's 3 requirements when we look at all the social studies of what builds for healthy relationships, whether it's a healthy team, whether it's a healthy marriage, whether it's what builds trust, what makes me feel closer to some people than others. There's 3 things that we see in every single study, and one of them is consistency. So Megan, to your point, when you had kind of this built-in group where you were hanging out on a regular basis, when you were all the same age, where you kind of had a life stage that like allowed for that consistency to happen, it felt easier. It's much harder if you feel like you have to schedule it, and if it feels like you have to book that for 4 weeks out, and then you have to like plan childcare, and like it's, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that makes that consistency hard. What's really worrisome to me is that it used to be that our younger generation, so you're talking about like college and high school and how it felt easier back then, What's sad now is that those are our loneliest generations. So, so Michael, you were asking earlier about the statistics, and I neglected to say, so over 60% of us are reporting lonely on a regular basis. So that means over half of us listening right now are lonely, and probably a lot of us haven't admitted that to ourselves. We haven't used that word. We haven't like really sat with that yet. But the truth is we are lonely. We wish we had more fulfilling, satisfying relationships in our lives. And what's sad is even higher than 60% is the millennials and the Gen Z. And so as we get younger now, this is the worrisome part, because it used to be that was where we had the most time for our friendships, was high school and college. Yep. And that we kind of chased the rest of our life trying to get back to that feeling. And that's not happening now. We don't see our teens and our 20-year-olds feeling that connected, unfortunately. And so we see a rise in suicide. We see a rise in anxiety. We see a rise in depression. And it is absolutely all connected, absolutely all connected. And and screens are a big part of it, unfortunately. I mean, I'd like to just say, I don't think they're in and of themselves terrible, but we do see mental health being impacted by that, and relationships being impacted by that. And so, we have a tough situation on our hands. COVID, we are bringing that up. What's really interesting about COVID is over 60% of us were lonely. A big study came out by Cigna, like 2 months before COVID happened. So it was great timing for us to get a really good sense of like 61% of Americans are lonely on a regular basis. Then post COVID, it's really interesting. The numbers went up a tiny bit. But what's fascinating is it wasn't so much that the numbers have changed all that much, but their who in there changed a lot. So 25% of us came out of COVID feeling way more isolated, way more disconnected, like just way more depressed. And another quarter of us came out of it feeling like, wow, I feel so much closer to people in my life. I feel like I got tighter to people. I feel like I was in a pod. I feel like I really connected. I felt like I invested more in being close to people. So it's interesting. We collectively didn't change all that much, but certainly that there's room in there for each of us to have had a different experience for sure. But 60% of us plus are not feeling connection.
It seems to be like one of the things we take for granted is that we think because we have these social connections on social media that it's kind of like a faux friendship. Mm-hmm. We think we're satisfying that social need, but we're really not. Yeah. It's like the junk food of relationships.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. Yep.
And I probably got that from you. But then the other thing too is that I think that so much of friendship, we kind of confuse our work relationships with friendships. And they're not mutually exclusive for sure, but I think that proximity plays such a big role in our friendships. And I noticed when I left my last big corporate job, which was almost 15 years ago now, I felt like I had all these great friends at work. Mm-hmm. And then I left and literally nobody called me. Yeah. And I didn't call any of them. Yeah. And it was just kind of, we just didn't have the convenience of proximity. Yep. And so it was like, we were just kind of work friends.
Yes. Yeah.
So because you've read a book called, and I highly recommend this, The Business of Friendship, Making the Most of Our Relationships Where We Spend the Most of Our Time. So could you talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah. So what you're naming is so common, Michael. It's so common. And in my first book, Friendships Don't Just Happen, I actually talk about 5 different types of friendships, because I talk about you look at you holding it up. Gold stars.
We've got both of them right here.
Because what you're describing is so significant that often we can have a group of friends, what I call common friends in that book, which is we can feel really, really, really close to them. But as long as the friendship is more or less dependent upon us both showing up in that container, the relationship is only going to be limited to that container. So when one of us quits the job or stops going to that church or moves out of the neighborhood or our kids don't go to the same swim class anymore, like as soon as that container changes, if we don't figure out a new way to put consistency in place, we will lose those relationships. And so that's happens so often. I think that's another contributing factor to our loneliness, is that we are going through life changes so quickly. I mean, the last I saw about we're moving every 5 years, we're changing jobs every 2 years. I mean, we're going through more marriages. We are just changing things in our life so much more. So we have to start over every time. Or we have to learn how to do what you were saying, like find a new way of being consistent with those work friends. You either have to go start over and kind of into those relationships, so to speak. They're not going to be there for you in the same way, or you have to figure out a new way of staying in touch with them. And if we don't do that intentionally, we are going to keep increasing our loneliness, because I'm finding that it takes us several years before we actually feel really close to people. Jeffrey Hall out of University of Kansas talks about how it takes 200 hours. We self-report that it takes 200 hours to become best friends with somebody. It's crazy. So when you think about it, like it takes several years to make that kind of time happen for a lot of us. And then if you change jobs or you move, you're kind of like letting go of an investment. So I would encourage more of us to think about those as investments and be like, I've already invested, quote, 100 hours. I'd rather protect that investment, build on that investment, even if it's kind of awkward, and start trying to figure out a new pattern, even if it means me now having to initiate time to get together or figure out a way to be in touch with each other. It's way, way more worth it and way easier in the long run than starting all over every single time. But yeah, what you're describing, Michael, is so common. And I would call those real friends. And I wouldn't say they were fake friends or anything. I would say they had real friendship, but you never had to practice building that friendship outside of the workplace. And so that would have, for them to survive, would have needed that.
That's good.
I think that's really helpful. It definitely changes how I think about moving, how I think about just all those changes that they're really easy to convince yourself of that are a good, this is a great idea in real time, and not count the cost because the benefits are kind of invisible.
You're so right, Megan. And think how often we move because we'll make more money, or so our kids will go to a better school for a few years, or all the reasons. And they're all good values. They're not bad reasons, but you're right. We don't sit down and say, and what will this do to my happiness and to my health and to our relationships for me? And if I'm going to do this, do it with your eyes wide open and say, I'm doing this knowing that I'm going to be walking away from a whole bunch of relationships. So it's on me to make the decision to either identify which relationships I want to stay in touch with, and I need to put in the time to like build that. Can they talk to me on the phone once a week after I move? Can we get together in this way? Can I go travel and see them once a year? Like, it's on me to stay in those relationships, or it's on me to make sure that when I land, I know that I have to start all over and do that and invest those times. So not be surprised by it 2 years later when we're just like, I don't have anybody.
Okay, I'm looking at the title of your book. Friendships don't just happen. So if they don't just happen.
I was going to ask you about your triangle model.
Yeah.
And you mentioned consistency, but could you just unpack that whole model for us? Because that was so simple and so elegant. And I thought, I can do this.
Awesome. That's what I love to hear. So in my second book, Frientimacy, I was looking and realizing I was doing the research that most of us, when we're lonely, it's not because we need to go meet new people. So my first book is kind of like how to make friends as an adult, if you will. But I was like doing the book tour, and studying and researching after that, and realizing a lot of us, it's not that we just need to go meet new people. We actually need to know what to do with the people we've already met. We actually need to learn how to go deeper. And most of us are lonely for more depth, not just for more social interactions.
Yeah.
And so Frientimacy is the book that I wrote where I looked at like, what is it that builds healthy relationships? And that's where I came up with the triangle, because there's 3 requirements that you'll see in every single social study, as I mentioned earlier. And those are positivity, which is the base of the triangle. And then the 2 arms up both sides of the triangle are consistency and vulnerability. And Michael, you heard me do that in the context of a work relationship. So I do that same triangle in my third book, The Business of Friendship. And that's more with a workplace in mind, because work is the number one place we make friends as adults, because it is the place we are most consistent. But those 3 things have to be present. And I can kind of define those a tiny bit. Consistency, I'll start there because that was the one we were kind of picking up on earlier. And that is, it's kind of the hours logged. It's the shared experiences. It's the memories we make. It's the interaction. It's the pattern that we put together in that friendship. So we could all 3 get together and have an amazing time together, but we won't be friends unless we repeat that, right? So we will have had a friendly experience. We'll have had a good time. But if we want to develop a relationship, we would have to be repetitive, and we would have to do that over and over and over and over and over and over again. So that one kind of makes sense for all of us. That's why friendship felt easy when we were in school. That's why we bond with people at work. That's why we, end up feeling closer to some people, even if we didn't plan on it. It's because something in our lives helped us see them on a regular basis. And I'll just say before I move on to the other 2, only two ways to build consistency. It's either join or participate in something that's consistent. So joining a book club, joining a mastermind, participating in some kind of an association, seeing the church that you go to as an option for building friendships. Like you have to either participate in something regularly where you're going to build relationships, or your only other option, and I hate to say it, but it's schedule it yourself. It means you have to initiate, you have to schedule it, you have to make it happen. So the friendship will never happen if we don't get that consistency, that pattern off the ground.
That's helpful. Demystifying.
Can you go just a little bit deeper on that?
Yeah.
And speak to frequency?
Yeah.
Like if I'm serious about a friendship,
yeah.
like my wife and I just played golf with a couple that literally we've known for 40 years, but we hardly ever see them. We live in the same town. Every time we get together, we pick up where we left off. I mean, it's a great relationship, but there's not the consistency.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, because we were talking about how can we build this friendship, because we really would like to do that in this season, but what's the right frequency?
Yeah,
I mean, it
such
sounds like
a good question.
Sounds like a little kid question, but
No, I love it. And I love that you said we could pick up right where we left off, because I hear that so many times. And what's so beautiful about those relationships is they do leave us feeling a sense of support. Like we know we could call them in the big things, and we know we have history with them. But yeah, to your point, you're not getting the benefit of them on a daily basis or weekly basis.
Right.
And so the consistency, so the research is showing that we will feel closest to the people that we talk with or interact with at least once a week. So some of us will do 2 or 3 times a week. Some of us it'll be every other week, but kind of that peak time and this might only work for 3 to 5 of your relationships. You know, this isn't something. So when we go up the triangle, we'll start that at the bottom of the triangle, at the widest base. These are all the relationships in our lives. And it's only as we practice these 3 things over and over and over that we go up the triangle. So we go up the triangle as we increase that consistency, increase our vulnerability, and increase the way we express that positivity to each other. So at the top of the triangle, we're not going to have a ton of people up there. Most of us, when we're lonely, it's because we don't have anyone up there or enough people up there. So for most of us, the answer, like I get reporters calling me all the time. We have a loneliness epidemic. How do people go make friends, or where should they go meet people? And I'm often saying it's not a matter of us not meeting enough people. Like we've all met so many people. For most of us, it's a matter of how to practice consistency, vulnerability, and positivity with the people we have met and move them up the triangle. That's the hard part. The meeting people is, I mean, it's awkward. Some places are more conducive than others, but it's the deepening of the friendship that's actually keeping most of us lonely. So it's a beautiful question, Michael. And for you to already have vulnerability with them and already have all that history. So you do still have consistency with them because you're still interacting with them. You're still in touch with them. So you do have it. And if you wanted to deepen that friendship, you have the correct answer. It is frequency. It's figuring out a way to be like, how do we see them more often? How do we interact with them in between those times? Is it something where even though we've been couple friends, is it something where he and I can go do something and build a friendship, the two of us a little bit more, or that she and the wives can go do that? And like, there's all these different ways to kind of like increase that frequency, or the ways you interact, or kind of like the times you spend together and what you're doing. And so, yeah, definitely that is the answer. The more you interact, the more you benefit from the relationship, for sure.
And I think in a world where we can't take proximity for granted,
yeah,
you know, it's not our next door neighbor typically.
Yeah,
it may not even be somebody in our, neighborhood. But we've got to be consistent. We've got to be intentional.
So what happens, I had this happen with a good friend. We used to walk twice a week together. So Tuesdays and Thursdays, we were both trying to get our exercise in. We didn't have any competition first thing in the morning. It was like before the kids had to get out the door to school. We met early and we would walk, and it was awesome. And then she ended up moving out of town. And it's like feels like such a loss because we have so much in common. We like each other so much. But that container, like our friendship happened in that container. Our kids went to school together too. So we saw each other at school stuff. But we were like out there at the rec center, twice a week doing our walk. So if you have somebody in your life, or maybe somebody you met at a mastermind who doesn't live in the same state or even the same country that you live in, like, can you do consistency with distance? Is that even possible? Or does it have to be people like that live within 5 minutes of you or something?
It's such a great clarifying question, Megan. Proximity helps create consistency, no doubt. There's so many studies that show we're going to bond with the people we see most often who are closest to us. But most of us are going to have some of our bestest relationships be long distance. I just moved to a new house 2 years ago, and I'm making new friends, but I will tell you, all my bestest friends are long distance friends right now. And that means that on Sunday nights, there's 5 of us that get on a Zoom call every Sunday night. Whoever can make it, we're on a Zoom call. That means every Wednesday at noon, I'm talking to my friend Cher. That means that I've got 2 or 3 other people that I'm like always thinking about when I'm on a walk, which one can I call and talk to? So my closest friends, like I have incredible intimacy and the highest level of vulnerability with them. And I may only see them a couple times a year or once a year even. But it did help that at some point we did have consistency in person. Sure. So we certainly have memories that we've made and have had the benefit of knowing each other in that way and having shared those experiences together. But absolutely, most of us need to learn how to do more intimacy in a long distance way because we're moving, we're on the move often. And again, it goes back to the point of like, why start over every single time?
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. I think that would be encouraging to a lot of people because it's just, even if you don't move or you don't change jobs, your friend might, and we don't want to be starting over all the time. So
yeah, agreed. So let's talk about positivity because, like I was saying, it didn't make sense to me when I just saw it on the slide. But as you begin to unpack it, I thought that's absolutely right. That's why that's got to be the foundation.
Yeah. So positivity is not being Mrs. Positivity. It's not being Pollyanna. It's not being a positive person. By scientific definition here, positivity is leaving each other feeling positive emotions. And so it's the way we interact in a way that leaves us feeling the reward of friendship. So any of us listening to this podcast, when we think about wanting friends, not a single one of us is thinking like, oh yeah, I would just love to have more people who like make me feel like I'm never doing enough and that I'm like always losing and like that they are like, they're judging me. Like every single one of us, when we think about wanting friendships, it's like, I want to feel loved. I want to have fun. I want to laugh. I want to feel adored. I want to feel appreciated. I want to it's the rewards we want. It's the good feelings we want. And we're human animals. Like we don't even necessarily stop to think, but every single thing we do, we're doing with hopes that it leaves us feeling good. And that's true of every single person that we interact with. We are going to, most of us unconsciously gravitate to the people who have left us feeling good about ourselves in the past. So when we walk into a room, we're going to be drawn to the people who have left us feeling some level of a pleasant emotion. So the reason that's at the foundation of all relationships is that if we don't leave each other feeling good, and by good, that can mean inspired or encouraged or validated or empathy or laughter, enjoyment, just all those, any pleasant emotions, they're all, so many of them, so good. If they don't leave us feeling good, we're not going to want to be consistent and interact with them on a regular basis. We're not going to devote the time. We're not going to get the babysitter for it. We're not going to be excited when girls' night comes or the guys are getting together. We're going to find ourselves feeling kind of like, I don't know if I want to do this and that's a way of recognizing it probably hasn't had a huge reward or a big payoff for us. And vulnerability is the third requirement. We're not going to be vulnerable with somebody if they don't leave us feeling loved and affirmed and validated and empathized with. So it is the foundation in that, and I always think of the Maya Angelou quote that was like, and I'm paraphrasing badly here, but kind of like, we'll forget what they did for us. They'll forget what they said to us, but we won't forget how they made us feel, yes. And that's positivity. So it's leaving each other feeling seen. So the way we practice this is being so much better at thinking when we first interact with somebody, when we get together, being like, oh, I'm so glad, I've been looking forward to having this lunch with you, or like, just an affirmation and telling that person we're excited. It's making sure when we leave, we say, thank you so much for sharing all of that with me. I feel so like special that you shared that, and I'm with you and cheering for you all the way. It's just letting them know, it's taking away any doubt. Here's the thing. Every single one of us, our greatest fear is the fear of rejection, which means we're afraid of them not liking us the way we might like them. We're afraid of not being liked. We're afraid of not being wanted. We're afraid of not being loved. And we're going to walk away and wonder if we said the wrong thing and if we should have done it this way or done that. Anything we can say to our friends, to each other that says, you're accepted, I love you, I see you, like that cannot be underestimated because people are craving feeling more loved, and they're going to gravitate to the people who leave them feeling that.
I just reflect on my own friendships and the people I want to hang around.
Yeah.
I don't need more emotional vampires.
Yeah.
I don't need people that drain me.
Yeah.
What I need people that are it's a life-giving relationship.
Yes. Yes. I would be curious, Michael, I love the exercise you're doing. So when you think about them, you could probably go down the list of like, what is it about that person that I find myself excited to hang out with them? Or what is it about that person? And you could probably even name the different ways you get positivity from different relationships.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's go to vulnerability.
Vulnerability is the third requirement, and it's so important because if you just have positivity and consistency, that's what we would call a social life. It's people that you enjoy hanging out with and you see them on a regular basis. So we've got a lot of poker clubs, golf groups, book clubs, moms groups that can fulfill that definition. But for lack of the third requirement, we're not going to feel close to each other. We're not going to feel known. We're not going to feel like that they get me, that they see me. So vulnerability is the ability to reveal ourselves in incremental ways where we feel like both people are opening up a little bit. And this is where we're kind of learning about who each other is, how they respond to different things, what hurts their feelings, what makes them laugh, just kind of all the little data that we're taking in at all times about each other and kind of putting a folder in place that says, this is who this person is. This is their personality. This is their stories they've told me. This is how they respond to life. This is how he takes his coffee. This is how she does this. But it's all the data that we're just kind of picking up and learning about each other. And this is the one that leaves us feeling known. We all say we want to be loved, but if people just adored us, but we don't feel like they know us, it leaves you feeling very empty. There's a ton of celebrities. There's a ton of people who are adored and loved, and yet they're like, but you don't even know me. And so it's that knowing each other that really leaves us feeling that, truly loved. And so the vulnerability is what creates that sense of meaningfulness and being known in a relationship.
That makes a lot of sense.
What can we do to foster that? Because I think a lot of people get into a relationship and they're kind of waiting for the other person to go first. But how can we foster vulnerability, get below that surface level? Because I've had friends, frankly, that have been very surfacey, and I've been frustrated because it doesn't go to a deeper level. But I kind of have a fear that, or a suspicion that I'm partly responsible.
That's so beautiful. In men's friendships, we've done such a disservice to men's friendships, Michael. We have not given permission, encouraged, and modeled men's friendships to be vulnerable. We have basically only told men in so many terms that it's only safe for you to be vulnerable in a romantic relationship. And so we have not done a really great job of encouraging men to be vulnerable with each other. So of these three requirements, that is the one that leaves men most often feeling lonely for sure. So it's a beautiful question. And I do teach it on the triangle. So at the bottom of the triangle, our consistency is somewhat low. So we move up that triangle as we increase our consistency. So too should our vulnerability go up a little bit. So I'm never advocating just like, go to 10 on vulnerability right away. It's like, so we have a little bit of consistency. If we're getting together in this mastermind, then we get to know each other a little bit in that context. And it should feel appropriate for the level of relationship we have. And then if it feels good, if we had positive responses, we left with positivity, then we're going to see them again. And as we have more consistency, then we also increase our vulnerability. And you see, I'm just kind of drawing with my finger that we keep going through these three things in an incremental, slow, safe way. So I'm never advocating that we just need to prove ourselves and go vulnerable, go big, or go home. It's that you do it in a little steps at a time. But absolutely, the things that can make the biggest difference is listening, which is a skill that we don't do very well at all. And then asking questions that are more personal. It's amazing how often, the studies where we tape record people's conversations and listen to them and listen back, it's amazing how the bulk of what we talk about is the Netflix series we're watching and the Olympic sports we were and we're just talking about all these things. And it's possible to talk for hours and hours and hours and not actually find out what's going on in each other's life. So one of my favorite questions that I am known to ask all my friends all the time is basically highlight, low light, and I change it up based upon the context, but basically so I haven't seen you all summer. So I want to make sure, tell me one thing that's gone really well, that's felt really good this summer, that's made you really happy, and what's something else that's been kind of hard or been stressful. And I would love to hear that while we eat lunch or whatever. And so I'm always asking some version of highlight, low light. And the reason I do that is one, I don't want to be at risk of asking about how are your kids and how was that vacation and how's your job and how's this? And we could talk for 3 hours and then you leave and I didn't ask the right question about how's your health, right? And I wouldn't have known that she's got something big going on in her life with her health. So I'm very careful that I would rather hand it off to my friend or to the other person to share with me what matters most to them. And so by more broad questions, I hopefully will leave that space for them to share what matters most. And we don't risk time just talking about the easy things. And it helps give space for kind of both ends of the spectrum. And of course, I would be willing to share those things too. And so just kind of thinking through how can we ask questions? And Michael, in your case with other men, it's going to have to be something that's modeled, and it's something that what I can tell you is that men crave vulnerability as much as women. Men are lonely and they want to feel known and connected. And they may not have as much practice. They may not have felt as much encouragement in it, but the need is so palpable. And so we need way more men willing to show up and practice doing that because the need is really, really huge.
It's powerful.
A question I started asking, love to see what you think about this, but I just started asking some of my friends, I said, what's important to you in this season?
I love that. Yeah.
And sometimes it's corrective, something it's like, well, I discovered this health thing that I've really got to put my focus on to get better. Or, be, well, I'm really excited about this book I'm writing or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But it helps you see what their priorities are.
Love it.
And it's safe.
Yep.
Pretty safe.
Yep.
And then you can get to those deeper questions.
Yeah.
I love yours as well.
That's a great one.
This is all so helpful. I'm like
Super
taking
helpful.
so many mental notes, and I know that people are listening and thinking, okay, now what? Like, yes, I'm lonely. I get kind of the triangle framework of the ingredients that need to go into making friendships, but how do I actually do it? Like, if I leave the listening of this podcast, maybe I'm out on a walk right now, or I'm in the car line at school, or I'm commuting to the office. What's next? If I want to make this a priority, what's my action plan?
So I would say get a Post-it note and write down the 3 to 5 people that you want to prioritize. Like if you were looking 6 to 12 months out and you were like, who are the people that I want to be closer to? So a lot of us are lonely, not for lack of knowing people. We're lonely for staying in touch with too many people. Our network is so big, and we're trying to and a lot of this for women, especially, our loneliness often comes, we're the people who are keeping all of our kids with their friends and our husbands and our family members. And we're like staying in touch with everybody. And we can be lonely for just going too many relationships. So for all of us, it's really who are 3 to 5 people that I wish I could be closer with. And if you don't have 3 to 5 names, who are some people that you've met that you're like, I kind of wish I were closer to them. I would love to know them. Or where are places that you want to be more consistent, that you could meet some of those people? So do you want to get into cycling? Have you been wanting to volunteer? So trying to think of like, where could you go to meet some of those people? But for a lot of us, we've met them and we just need to kind of prioritize them. So really getting clear of like, where is our energy going? Because what we want to do now is kind of narrow our focus and be much more intentional in saying, these are the people I'm prioritizing. When it comes to frequency, these are the people that I'm going to make time for. So when I'm on book tour, when I'm traveling, when I'm super busy out speaking, I can't stay in touch with all my friends, but I know who my 4 or 5 people are that like when time is at a kind of push comes to shove, those are the people that don't get shoved, right? So we need to like really know who our priorities are and hold ourselves accountable to that. So I haven't talked to this person in 2 weeks. I said this was one of my people who was a priority. What am I doing to implement that priority? So being really clear. The second thing for those of you who are listening, who are kind of like strategic and love really being successful and having goals and all that kind of stuff, is I love looking at the names that you have written down and ask yourself which one of the 3 requirements would make the biggest difference in each of those relationships. Like which one is lagging behind?
Very
so
good.
in some of them, like Michael, your example was this couple, we have good vulnerability. We pick up right where we left off and we have a good time. We enjoy being around them, but we don't see them very often. So if we wanted to deepen that relationship, we know that we'd have to increase consistency. For some of us, we have people we see all the time or regularly, and we have a good time. That was kind of the social group I was referring to earlier, but we know that in those relationships, if you wanted to go deeper, you would need to increase vulnerability. So your strategy there is going to have to be a little different. So you're going to have to think, okay, when we get done playing golf, maybe I need to ask if so-and-so wants to like stay and have lunch in the club with me. And I need to be ready to kind of ask some questions about life, right? So like what we're doing as an activity together might not be conducive to vulnerability, but what could I do that's kind of a add-on to that? Or could we ride together? Could I call and offer to pick him up? And can we carpool together? Like, how do I get time with this person where we have the space to have that vulnerable conversation? In another relationship, you might look and say, wow, I'm connected with them. We've known each other a long time. The consistency's there, and the vulnerability's there. But like honestly, every time they call me, I just kind of go, ugh, and my whole energy drops. And we know that positivity is missing, right? So that's a relationship that has become more obligatory than fun and meaningful. So it invites the question, we know from the science that we have to have 5 positive emotions in every relationship for every negative emotion for it to stay healthy. So when we look at like marriages, we start worrying whenever marriage goes underneath that ratio. And so the same is true of our friendships. We are going to get annoyed with each other. We're going to be disappointed with each other. There's going to be stressors. Nobody's perfect. But we can always ask ourselves if we want to change that positivity ratio. Is there anything I can do to reduce the negativity? Do I need to have a conversation? Do I need to forgive? Do I need to stop judging? Do I need to set up boundaries? Like, is there something I can do to reduce the negative emotions I'm feeling? Or there's always something we can do to increase the positive emotions. Maybe we've gotten in a rut and we need to go do something fun together. Maybe we need to go to a comedy club. Maybe we need to go do something kind of crazy. Maybe I need to see if they're up for just doing something fun this weekend. And so what can we do? Maybe we've gotten in a bad habit of just complaining every time we're around each other, or just maybe I just feel like they're talking nonstop and I don't get a space to talk. So that's ruining my joy. Like, what can I do? What can I experiment with that kind of starts shifting the pattern that we've established in this relationship? And so let's get that positivity back. So identify your people and then kind of put a strategy together based on what would make the biggest difference.
That is really helpful.
It's so practical. And I just think in my own brain, I'm going, oh, that's not that hard.
Yay.
That's not rocket science. It's not a black box.
Exactly.
I have a question about male friendships. And I don't know if this is just an anecdotal observation or there's any research behind this, but I noticed that men have a hard time if they're looking at each other and they're trying to get a more intimate relationship. And to me, when I'm in an extended activity like fishing or golfing where I'm side by side, then I can ask those questions that are more vulnerable. And it's not as scary as looking into my eyes and having to ask it. Is there anything around that? Is that a male thing?
So,
or is that just, I have a unique?
No. It's a thing for sure. Where there's some conversation about it is how much of that is prescriptive versus descriptive, because men in other cultures enjoy looking at each other and having deep conversations and sit around tables and do conversations. So we know it's not a gender thing, but it might be a male American thing or other countries as well. This is how we have conditioned you. We've conditioned you that you do activities side by side. And we as women have been conditioned that we do bonding face to face, but that's just conditioning and that can change. And it's hurting your health. It's one of my theories for why men die sooner than women. And one of my theories why men tend to remarry faster after death and divorce, because the only place we've told you it's okay to be vulnerable is in your romantic relationships. And it's killing you. It's hurting you. So I would venture to say it's going to feel a little awkward, but you're all literally dying for it. So learning how to do it, you're capable of it. Some men are so capable of it, but you might be less practiced at it. So Naomi Wade has done research and she has a book called Deep Secrets where she actually tracks boys, Michael, where boys and girls have the same level of vulnerability up until about puberty. And then when it's kind of something about, we watch this thing happen where the boys up to that point will look at each other and go, I love you. He's my best friend. Like they talk to their best friends the same way girls do. And then something starts happening there where it's not cool to be like a girl. And we start seeing something shift and we start seeing girls go deeper and boys just doing more slapstick funny and hitting each other and just kind of competing and playing. And when you can watch the boys' loneliness and you can watch the suicide rates go up and you watch this thing happen. So I think what's really fascinating is that you're capable of it, but I don't think you're getting as much practice at it in high school and college as the girls are getting. But we need to change that. We desperately need to change that.
This conditioning is really interesting. I remember being in Ethiopia about 12 years ago, and I would see adult men walking through the villages holding hands.
Yes.
It was just friendship.
Yep.
And I was kind of taken back by that because that would be, difficult for a lot of traditionally raised men in this culture to do that. But it just made me aware of how conditioned I am.
It is. I mean, you go to Greece and it's all men sitting in taverns, like at tables, just talking and laughing and playing games. I mean, I go other places and travel and I'm like, where are the women? Like it's men are the ones who often have the time to be sitting around the tables talking. And like, I take pictures of men and men's groups all around the world, just being like, wow, because you're right here. That doesn't happen as much, but the need is huge. So I hope you change it.
Well, we could continue having this conversation for hours and hours because there's just so much here. Alas, we are at the end of our time together. But we always ask our guests 3 questions.
Oh, dear.
And it's kind of a lightning round, but they're really deeper questions. And, the show is called The Double Win Show because we want people not just to win at work, we want them to win in all 9 domains of their life. That's what we think of when we think of success, including community. So what is the biggest obstacle for you personally in getting that double win, winning at work and succeeding at life?
That's a vulnerable question.
It's a vulnerable question.
I love it. I'm good for it. So what's the biggest obstacle to me winning in both places, just in general or in my relationships?
Yeah, just in general. Yeah, just in general.
Particularly in this season.
For me, I think the biggest obstacle is being willing to be seen even when I feel like I'm failing or even when I feel like I'm not looking as great. And, sometimes just feeling like I can be tempted when I'm under stress to put on a persona or put on a happy face. And so really making sure that I practice vulnerability. And that's on social media too, in appropriate ways, in a broader way, but also with my close friends. So kind of holding myself to that vulnerability that matters so much.
That's really good. How do you personally know when you've gotten the double win, when you're winning at work and succeeding in life?
Boy, it's just such a feeling, isn't it? It's so I have a definition of success that has 5 different things. So it looks at my well-being, it looks at my lifestyle, which to me is like sitting on my deck, having spacious, slow mornings and then travel and a bunch of other things. And then it has to have impact and it has to have financial well-being and then it has to have relationships. So I do a pretty often assessment of those. And when I have all 5 of those, feeling like I'm a 7 or above, I feel like I'm winning. Yeah. So to me, just making money, if it were at risk of my health, it wouldn't be winning. Or if I had great relationships, but it was at risk of, not being able to have the impact I want in the world. So for me, those 5, when they all come together, I feel like I'm winning.
It's like having kind of a baseline of attentiveness to all those areas. And they're getting what they need.
And not willing to sacrifice one.
I know that's a unique answer.
Not willing to sacrifice one for the other.
Yeah. Yes. We are right there with you. Okay. What's one ritual or routine that helps you do what you do?
Slow mornings. I love slow, spacious mornings. So waking up, sitting on my deck, having coffee, and then my husband and I will we'll read a book together and just have big conversations and just have some different rituals, gratitude journals, meditation stuff. And to me, just having that locked in just feels like such a
it's like the ultimate luxury.
Yeah, it is.
Before we say goodbye here, if people want to start with your work and go deeper, where should they start? You've got, 3 books, right?
Yeah.
And there's your website, several videos.
Yeah, that's good questions. If you feel like you want new friends, then Friendships Don't Just Happen is a great book for you. If you want deeper friends, we talked a lot about frientimacy today. Most of the stuff came from the frientimacy book. If you're wanting better relationships at work or you're the leader of an organization, we've got 60% of the workforce lonely. We need to address that. That would be the business of friendship. And then if you just are on my newsletter list at shastanelson.com, I have international trips I take people on a couple times a year. I have friendship coaching circles. I have a ton of videos on YouTube. So I have a podcast that just came out this summer that's all about tough conversations with friends and some of the hard things that happen with our friendships. So all of that stuff would be on my website, or if you sign up for the newsletter, I would always announce stuff when it's coming out.
ShastaNelson.com. Yeah. I love this idea too of getting a circle of your friends and reading through the books, because then you kind of get everybody calibrated to the same kind of framework.
I love that.
And I like
Michael.
that.
I love that.
You
and
have a common language.
Yes. And I have on my website under each of the books, I have written a book study guide to go with every single one of my books.
That's perfect.
And not only did I do a book study guide, I did a book study guide for all of them that is an option to meet 4 times and just talk through a few chapters at a time, because secretly, I'm trying to help you practice consistency and lock in 4 interactions with each other and talk about your relationships at the same time. So trying to help you bond with each other while you talk about my book. So that's all free on my website.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been a great conversation, and I'm sure it won't be the last.
Well, it was so nice to be here. And thank you both. Seriously, I meant what I said at the beginning. To put the spotlight on this subject means so much. Thank you.
Man, I just really like her.
I knew you would. And in fact, when I was watching her present at the conference we attended, I thought I wish Megan were with me because she would eat this up. So what were your biggest takeaways?
Well, it really confirmed to me how important friendship is. And just personally for me, why I started a mastermind, why we started a mastermind, 2 masterminds, because this is tricky to figure out. And I think a lot of us feel the need for this, especially as high achievers. And I really appreciated how simple she made it. I like that she said it wasn't primarily about meeting new people, because I think that's the part, as an introvert anyway, that's the part that I'm like, oh gosh, it feels like dating. Like I got married so I didn't have to date, and the fact that it's really about some key ingredients, only 3, not that many. And from my perspective, the consistency part is the challenge more than anything.
Same for me too. Yeah, I think I was really taken aback again, as I was when I heard her speak, about this epidemic of loneliness. Mm-hmm. And I've heard again and again in various health circles, and both of us are health kind of nuts, and I'm sort of a wannabe biohacker.
You're more of a nut than I am.
Yeah, well, I'm just realizing though that whether it's nutrition or sleep or exercise or any of the things that people talk about on the health shows that I listen to, the trump card is relationships.
Yeah.
If you have social connection, that trumps everything. And when she talked about that Harvard study that proves that, I just said, yeah, I'm not surprised. I would add to it purpose, and social connection. Those are the 2 things that trump everything else. Mm-hmm. And it's not like it's either or, but that's got to be the top of our priority list.
Yeah. I think this is maybe an area that we emphasize less because we feel less confident. It doesn't have metrics surrounding it,
right,
that we can, it's not so quantitative. It's more of a qualitative thing. And so I think it's easier to be dismissive of, it was interesting. I was thinking about that statistic of 61% of people report being lonely, and that's been consistent for years, even COVID notwithstanding. I thought that was really interesting. But I thought to myself, I have thought about people in my life that I'd like to be closer to. And I have pulled back from initiating something with them because I saw on social media them with, and I put this in air quotes, groups of friends. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I'm sure they already have all the friends that they want. Now, in reality, if 61% of people are lonely, those people are not necessarily their friends or not their close friends.
Right.
And I think that sometimes social media makes it seem like it's everybody but us, but it's not.
Well, and somebody else told me this, and it wasn't from Shasta, but I think it applies here. And that is if you want a best friend, be the friend you wished you had.
Right.
And I think it all boils down to initiative. Mm-hmm. And I've often said what gets scheduled gets done. And this is really true in friendships, because it's not one of those things that if we think we're just going to give it our leftover time, or if we have a free night, maybe we'll call up a friend. But if we can schedule it, at least for me with my schedule, it's got to get on the calendar or it's not going to get done.
Yep.
And that means I just need to prioritize.
Yeah. Such a good conversation.
Okay, guys, thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to another great episode next week. In the meantime, if you would do us a favor, and that is rate the show, give us a 5-star rating, and then also review it. We would love that. It helps get this message of the double win out, because we're on a mission to get the message out there, not just this podcast, but the message. Thanks for listening.